Welcome to Double Helix, where everything is connected. Hey there, awesome viewers and listeners. I'm your host, Mark Merritt, and on this show, we're going to dive into the fascinating web of connections that shape our health and our lives. From our physical and psychological well-being to our emotional and spiritual growth. We'll explore how these connections, whether they're with the people around us or in intricate networks within ourselves, all the way down to our DNA, and how that can transform our lives for the better. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up for episodes that resonate with you. Let's get connected. Well, good morning, everybody. Another awesome morning in Utah. I think we're on the edge of winter coming into spring because the weather can't decide what it's doing.
March is typically mud season out here. You are right. So we are on the cusp of, warm but unpleasant outdoor weather.
Yeah, no, it's warm enough. I think it's starting to tease. So, everybody, I just want to make sure that today it's going to be awesome. We've got David Ball with us. And David Ball is a friend of mine that I met, 5 years or so ago. And he's a marketing guru. I will throw it out there. His company is Arch Nemesis, which so fits him. You'll find by the end of the show that fits. And so
Perfect. I'm glad that I was correct, that people would eventually go, that is a good one.
Yeah, no. The moment you said, "Hey, I've got Arch Nemesis," I'm like, okay, this is awesome.
Good. Perfect.
So anyway, David has been involved in marketing for years. And before I met him, correct me if I'm wrong, David, you were you worked out with Red Bull. Is that right?
Yeah, I was with Red Bull North America for a handful of years in Utah and then in the Midwest. And then when LeBron decided to leave the Midwest, I had met who is now my wife out there, and I was like, I think mission accomplished. And so when he left, I too decided to leave the Midwest for greener pastures and followed him out west, just stopped once again in Utah and set up and have been working in tech-related fields out here ever since.
So, and that's where we met, is the tech related stuff, and so like that. So, yeah. So you left because LeBron left?
Well,
I was not aware of.
Well, I really enjoyed working for Red Bull. I have a lot of friends that are still with them. And I'm still such a, I don't really drink other energy drinks. If I'm going to drink an energy drink, it's still Red Bull. But while I was there, I learned a lot. And then it was just my personality is I'm just like really always eager to be like, I think I can do that. And so I had learned a lot of Red Bull and was keen to go and see where I could apply that and what I was able to do. And at Red Bull, it's just a big company, and so like for you to actually be in a decision-making situation, you're looking at 10, 15 years kind of hopping around the country. And so they were pushing me to move to, New York City, Philadelphia, or Santa Monica. And I, after having lived in LA for a summer, just have no interest in big cities. And so Utah is just, I guess I read too much Thoreau in college, has kind of always been my joke. Going up to school where you live now in Logan. And so I was just a lot more interested in getting back to the mountains. And then also being in a situation where I could essentially like put myself in an outweighed risk environment where it's like, yeah, like sink or swim. So I found a company that was willing to let me help launch a marketing department, even though they were already doing about $200 million a year, but had never had a marketing department. So I was like, all right, I guess I'm moving back to Utah and we're going to go see what I actually know and don't know. And it worked out. So, and since then, yeah, I've been back here in Utah I'm a professor of I shouldn't say professor, a prophet maybe, the lifestyle I call radically mediocre, which is, I just want to be good enough at all of these things that you get to do in Utah, like trail running, backcountry skiing, rock climbing, paragliding, skydiving, and mountain biking, road cycling. I haven't done much road cycling, but again, the radically mediocre lifestyle is, well, I just want to be good enough at all those things I can hang. Like people, when they're putting something fun together, they're like, yeah, David could come.
Yeah,
He
he's
could do that.
okay. He's okay.
I'm not gonna win it. I'm not gonna like be leading the pack, but like I'm not a detriment to what's going on. And so that's been my whole outside of work. I just try and be radically mediocre at everything I do because I just want to get invited on as many cool things as possible, which is Utah is the perfect environment for that.
Yeah. I've never heard being radically mediocre. And once again,
It's a lifestyle.
that is right there up your lane, man. So I don't know how many times I've reached out to David for whatever reason. And, let's see. Oh, I'm outside of Chicago. We're going skydiving. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do? Oh, we're staying in with some mobile home or something, right? Because we're here right off the airport skydiving. And I was like, really?
We do own we own a mobile home. Well, it's not mobile anymore, but I think I don't even know the name. I just call it 8 Mile from in movie. So we have an 8 Mile trailer out in 90-ish minutes west of Chicago, Illinois, where we live for a few weeks every year surrounded by cornfields. It's somewhere, it's the skydiving version of Field of Dreams. So, I can't argue against it. It's definitely one of those things. It's like going away and joining the circus. You just don't get it until you do it. And then you're kind of like, oh, okay.
So it's the skydiving version of Field of Dreams. So what you're saying is you're seeing dead people?
There are people who I see in that sport, and I definitely go borrowed time. Or actually, in base jumping, in base jumping they call that non-sustainable base jumping, and by that they just mean like that person is not going to be around. So
non-sustainable. Okay,
non-sustainable activity for sure. So skydiving, super safe. My wife got into it within the last year, which is now why we own a mobile home. Because believe it or not, when she was not into the sport, she was not okay with us spending time in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. Now she gets it. She's been pretty much inducted into that lifestyle through and through, where money is no longer money. It's just jump tickets and tunnel time for indoor skydiving, which is like the driving range of skydiving. So it's, it's been great because we spend so much time together. It's been terrible for our investments. So, we're investing in the present, I guess, this year. What can you do?
That's right. We're investing in today.
Yeah, you drink and be married for tomorrow. Your parachute maybe doesn't open. There you go.
Okay, well, that would be why my wife goes, no.
It's safe. You'd be fine. Your wife, I think she would love it. If we could just get her up, she'd have a great.
Well, it was like years ago we were watching. It was one of those reality, the reality shows that aren't really reality shows. It's like they're totally scripted, right? But they had
every reality show. Maybe save The Bachelor, but
maybe. I don't know. I've never watched The Bachelor, and I don't really have any desire to watch that. So
okay, this is a great no. This is a great point for this podcast. I too hated The Bachelor, and I still hate 70% of it. But the first 3 episodes are Lord of the Flies on camera, because there's 30, 40 guys. I don't know the exact number, and they all have to stand out in this crazy environment. And so they're doing the most insane stuff. Same thing with the girls. It's like the swap where the girls are trying to get the guy. Just watching what people do, it's just crazy where you try and walk back. How did someone think that was a good idea? Or, the first 2-3 episodes, very worth watching. After that, once it gets serious and they start all using the same kind of and this is great, smart on their end, but they start using the same language. It is like a cult, right? I'm really starting to trust, the process and our journey and our connection. Like they all use across somehow it's like the thing that they all got briefed on before getting on the show to use these same terms when they're talking about how they're going through stuff. Um, so that's stuff. That's where I'm like, okay, now it's boring. Now we're actually trying to find love a TV show. But the first 2 to 3 episodes, it, you know, it's like one life raft available for 40 people. It's great.
So yeah, they had one on years ago called Secret Millionaire,
Oh yeah. I think
right?
I remember hearing
And
about
they
this.
actually highlighted a guy from Utah that went down to Vegas, a millionaire that went down to Vegas, right? And he was out there and he bumps into this guy in a wheelchair and he's at a skate park. And you've seen him, he's part of Nitro.
Yeah. I was gonna say the Wheels guy.
Wheels, yeah. And he bumps into this is before Wheels becomes famous, right? He's just some kid at a skate park. And he's out there watching this kid and Wheels does a backflip in the skate park up to the deck in his wheelchair. And at the time I was still in my chair and Victoria looks at me and she goes, "No." I'm like, "I'm good. No, I don't need to do that." Right.
Yeah. There's a nice thing in I'll say for any kind of sport where there's like the perceived risk is really high. And like the reality of risk in most sports is really low, right? I would say mountain biking is the one sport that I have that I'm like, I'm just here to have a good time. Everything else, it's fair to say, like Allie, my wife, always just like, yeah, you don't really know the term casual, right? Like I joke about this like radically mediocre thing, but it's like, yeah, it is like, but I came up with that joke to remind myself that I can't be really, really, really good every single thing I do. But my drive is to be really, really, really good at every single thing I do. So I had to remind myself, come up with some way to be like, hey, you're not going to get what you want by focusing on just this one thing. Like I am a, like generalized specialist type
Right.
guy when it comes to most things. I love to dabble, and that doesn't lend itself well to being, necessarily the expert at something. So what's the best way to think about it? And that's where I came up with, okay, well, if I tell myself that I just want to be this radically mediocre person, and the definition of that is that I'm still good enough to get invites to stuff that I want to be on. But the reality is I'm not going to be the best in the group every single time I go on it. Then that's okay. But mountain biking is the one place where that doesn't really apply. I feel the urge to like be like, you should hit that jump. And then I quickly remind myself the amount of people I know who are paralyzed from that sport. Or, even if I like break a collarbone, there goes pretty much all of my favorite things to do. And so I'm just like, yeah, the juice is just not worth the squeeze on this one.
Yeah.
So other than that, though, I'd say the reality of risk is very, very low in most sports, right? Like it comes down to your own decision making where you'll make a really bad decision most of the time that'll lead to some sort of injury. But I think the benefit of that, and Alex Honnold was just talking about this on Rich Roll that I didn't listen to, but of course I saw on Instagram. I did. But I think there is a lot of benefit where it's like, hey, when was the last time that you felt, some sort of like, oh, I might die sensation? Or like I was thinking it was like this evolutionary compulsion to like save your life, which like we could just think of rock climbing. It's terrifying, even though like every piece of gear you clip into is rated to at least, 11 or higher kilonewtons, and a single kilonewton is like 270 something pounds at a drop. So it's like gonna hold again, unless you make a bad decision. And so the reality of risk is not that high. The perceived risk is really high, but I think the benefit of putting yourself in those types of situations is it's like, perspective, like at a glance is all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, like turns out I am still afraid of dying, or like, or like it's, and the relationships you can develop from it. I had friends in college, and I was also working for Red Bull at the time, while in college somehow, luckily. And, some of my friends were living like Texas, and they would just like go out on the weekends, kind of typical college behavior. I went to school in Logan, Utah, where there is one bar and a really good canyon that you can go do anything you want in. So I spent a lot of my time rock climbing in college and being scared for my life, looking down at your friend, like being like, you got me, right? Like I'm about to go make this move. And like my evolutionary instinct is like, you're going to die. It's like, if you don't get this, you are dead. Thousands of years of self-preservation, are like screaming at you, which just speaks to how maybe I should have, trusted my gear more. But, but that relationship I had with those friends, like I sound like a jerk maybe, but there's no way you're going to convince me that my other friends in Texas, had a similar relationship with their friends because they took one too many shots, or something that with that weekend at a bar, like, I can think of like a very clear moment, like looking at a friend of mine with their hand on, an old piece of belay equipment that like climbing gyms don't let you use anymore, really. And I'm just like looking at that hand, I'm like, and they drop that hand, I'm dead. And okay, but I'm still gonna like, throw for a grip.
We're still doing
this,
this.
and I'm like, yeah, and it's just kind of like you're just like looking at that person, being like, I don't even know if I trust them, but I'm going to. And it's just like that environment that I've always really enjoyed in sports and in people. It's just that type of situation where you can go and like, I would rather be in like the trenches than like on the back end being like, man, it sucks up there. I bet, huh? But that's because I could get into World War I here. Great book you should read. I'll send it to you later.
Okay. David and I share books. It's like, hey, have you read this one? Okay, here's something to take a look at, and things like that. So, but yeah, that reminds me of one of the races I was in, because I raced hand cycles for years. While I was in the wheelchair, I did a lot of hand cycle racing. And I remember going to a physical therapist, and I was having, one of my shoulders was not happy with me. It was in my left shoulder wasn't very happy with me. It got hurt in the accident. So, it was like, it was a struggle. So I met the physical therapist, and he knows I have a race coming up. And he says, now, you don't have to do a PR, right?
Yes. I'm laughing because I know I understand where you're at. Yes.
And I told him, I go, what do you mean? How do you not? I mean, I said, listen, it'll be okay. Because if I do something, you're just going to put me back together, right? Just so you know, I don't know how to not try.
Right.
Right. And so that particular race, I had so much fun on that race. That was the Utah Valley Marathon. It was the last time they allowed hand cycles on the full marathon course.
I didn't know that they'd stopped allowing some of that stuff. You think it would go against like ADA?
Almost? Well,
does ADA apply to?
Well, they allow it on the half marathon. The full marathon, at least I don't know if they allow it now, but they stopped for years, and the reason is it was my fault. And
on record now.
On record, it was my fault. So, and I found that out because I had a conversation with the race director the next year, and he goes, "Yeah, the traffic control won't let us have hand cycles starting from, because the course there, starts up in Walsburg,
okay,
which is up Provo Canyon, and does a loop around that little area, comes down Provo Canyon. Well, the half marathon starts at the same time, down halfway down the canyon. Well, for a marathon runner, you're never going to catch up with unless the real people.
Oh,
right?
I see. Yeah, I see where this is going.
So I'm coming down the canyon. Now, in that particular race, it was so much fun because we got there and there was maybe only 20, 25 hand cyclists. And I'm looking around, and at that time, I'm a lot younger, skinnier, and faster. I'm just older, fatter, and slower now.
What's that Toby Keith song of like, I'm as good once as I ever was?
Exactly right. And so, but at this time, I'm racing a lot, and so I'm training a lot. So, I'm really big for a hand cyclist. I mean, even at my skinniest, I was 225 pounds, just because of my body type, right?
Right.
And so the only way I could beat the average hand cyclist, because they came in about $150.
Okay, well, easy.
Well, that's the average hand cyclist size, right?
That's so I should go compete. I think I'm 160 now.
So you'll have them as low as 125 to 150, because if you have a paraplegic, they don't have any
Yeah, the
lower
muscle
body
mass on the
mass,
legs,
right?
right.
So they're a lot lighter just because of that. And so the only way I could compete was to make sure I was as strong as a horse to keep up with everybody, right? And I did. Actually did really well. I'm at the beginning of the start line, and I'm looking at all the everybody there, and I'm like, I don't know you, and I don't know you, and I don't know you, but I can beat you. I beat you. I beat you. And I look at all these people that I beat in the past. I'm like, there's like 3 or 4 that I have never seen before show up at this race. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sprint out of here like it's a criterium. And if you don't know, people don't know what criteriums are. It's a short timed race. It usually is a kilometer or 2 kilometers. It's like NASCAR with cycling, right? I mean, it's
Oh,
just who
okay.
can do
Yeah,
the
it's
most
those.
laps
Yep.
within that short area. And so I came out of there like I was on a crit. And I am just, I mean, I pedaled so freaking hard. It actually, and I found out later, it did exactly what I hoped. It broke everybody's spirit behind me because nobody kept up with me. And so I just kept going, and I'm riding super hard, super fast. And before you know it, I'm catching up with runners from the half marathon.
Yeah.
And this is before they really got Provo Canyon wide, right? So it wasn't, there were sections where when they'd have the race, we were in one lane, and traffic was in the same direction coming down the canyon in
Right.
the other lane. Now I think they shut it down so traffic is just on one side of the highway. But then it was just like, oh, we're going to let the up canyon traffic have 2 lanes. The down canyon traffic gets 1 because there's athletes in the other.
Right.
So I'm out ahead, and I've got a motorcycle cop with me, because usually the first couple people, they'll have a motorcycle cop to kind of help keep things going. And I've got a cop with me, and I'm catching up with the runners. And he finally tells me to get out of the athlete lane and get in the traffic lane.
Yeah, just gotta get past everybody for a minute there.
And I am going faster than the cars down the canyon because they're being careful. I remember at one point catching up with this car going 45, and I'm thinking, this is a race, get out of my way. Of course, then I had to remind myself they're not in the race, right? So I'm going 45 down the canyon, just waiting, and finally get to the finish line 27 minutes ahead of second place. Never in my life have I blown
a
it
little
like,
demoralizing.
and
for those guys,
that is the race where I got done, and I'm like, yeah, need to go back to physical therapy.
My shoulder hurts a little bit.
I heard it a little bit. And then later the next year they called me and said, hey, can you be in the race again? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, but we only allow half marathons because of what happened last year. Like, okay.
I would take that as a pat on the back for sure. I mean, I think that's the interesting thing on, I understand exactly what you're talking about. Cause when I do a lot of trail running, I typically am thinking of, wanting to do longer objectives, stuff here in the mountain, like on our birthday. I have a twin brother. My twin brother and I ran from the base of kind of like the outlier mountains here in the Wasatch, and ran a route to Alta Ski Resort. It ended up, we turned 32, our 32nd birthday. And so we just, both hadn't been training for anything long, but just off the couch did. We're like, all right, hey, we were texting the night before and said, we should go do this. And so, it took us like 9 hours.
The sad thing is you have twin brothers who are both like, yeah, let's go do something we're not prepped for.
Yeah. We, if I was a professional athlete of anything, it'd be off the couch and being like, yeah, sure, I'll show up and do that. And then hoping I don't get injured along the way. And so, but like when I'm training or like just running in a day to day with my dogs or, anything along those lines, and I have those types of like, I don't necessarily have an objective every time that I'm training towards, but I know the type of stuff that I'm wanting to build momentum into. But then I go and I'm running the same trail right outside my house, and I go, I bet I could run this like first mile section with about like 800 feet of vert. I bet I could run that the fastest I ever have today for no reason. Like I should be doing zone 2 mellow training, but I'm
no, I feel good today.
I bet I could break a record. And that's where I'm like, DNA is so interesting, but I'm like, can someone explain that to me? Like, is this the psychology? But like, they always go into like Sam Harris is like, there's no such thing as free will, right? Like, you are coded to make the decisions that you are going to make. What's the line from like the Matrix and the Oracle? But it's like, you've already made the decision. You're just here to figure out why. That is maybe the only explanation of no free will that I'm okay with, where I'm like, okay, well, at least I was the kid who always asked why, which is why I probably ended up in marketing. But if that sounds like an interesting idea, but all the same, I'd be like, okay, so what is it in this chemical expression or DNA or whatever it might be that gets us to be like, oh, well, we should always, like, I'm here to do this, but maybe I actually instead go all out or do this thing or whatever. And, I'm sure a psychologist would have a heyday on that, but I'm curious again to what science could say, a non-social science could say about our personality traits when it comes to performance in those areas, even when no one's in the room, right? Or no one's around. And it's just you're, the compulsion to, or the drive to not, I shouldn't say like take it easy. Like I definitely take it easy on certain things. Like, oh, well, today's an easy day with work, or, like I go to the gym and I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's just a vanity day, like maybe I don't need to, leave here and like, and like have, and, like I always leave the gym and like, I'm never hungry for like an hour. And so sometimes I'm like, maybe I should like, the goal is to be hungry when I leave here and not just feel terrible. But what is like this thinking around it, or the expression in our DNA that gets people to be that way? And is that even a thing? Like the nature versus nurture. I would be really, really curious for someone to kind of go down and it's like, okay, yeah, like you have here's this recessive trait for physical expression in the way you look, or like, I am, all of my dad's family and a lot of my uncles on my mom's side are like bigger, like, like I come from a family of farmers and they all look like farmers. And then you get me and I look like a CPA, and wouldn't you know it, my dad is the only one out of all of his brothers who works in finance and investments, and, has never owned a farm, or he grew up working on one, but he looks nothing like a farmer. And so I'm just kind of like, how did that happen? And then was it the physical build of how he, like, what got him to go college and finance? And all my other, uncles on that side of the family are successful entrepreneurs, but all in some way work in farming still, or own land and do the farming thing and just look like it. And I'm like, is that, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, is that why, people buy nice gym clothes when they're trying to get into the gym? Because by looking the part, they go and play the part. And
I think there's some of that, there's the natural, that visualization, right? If I feel like, if I feel like I'm looking the part, then I'm going to naturally, from a psychological standpoint, I'm going to put more effort into it because I look good, right? I got all the right clothes. I got the right gear. I got whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you see that and I do that, I think we all do and I try in marketing, it's called the Range Rover effect, right? There's some education pieces here called Range Rover effect, where, and I like to use companies like the North Face is the best example of the Range Rover effect, which just doesn't make sense. But like, who do you think buys, like, in what environment are most people purchasing, like, well, let's call it like an expensive down North Face jacket for? Like, do you have any guesses on like who that person is, like that consumer, what environment they're like, I need to stay warm?
My guess is on that. In reality, I think it's not necessarily going to be somebody that is living in Toronto, right?
Right.
It's going to be somebody that, lives in a milder climate that happens to be going up someplace that is a little colder and they want to stay looking good.
I would actually say your first guess was closer. It's someone in New York City or Toronto or San Francisco.
Really?
Who needs to be warm going from one indoor space to the next. Like you and I see North Face. Like I remember, I grew up in Denver, ditched a lot of high school, go hang out at this one coffee shop in Boulder. I would just sit at the window. I'd see all the CU students walking around in their, puffy Patagonia jackets. And you think that's like, you and I, we think that's it. But no, most people who are buying these, $400 down jackets are in big cities. That's where the majority of consumers live. So the Range Rover effect is companies like Range Rover, the North Face, creating these products and creating them, I think, to their credit for, at least for the North Face, I know from their story, like they created them to be used in these extreme environments, right? On Denali, on, Lhotse and the Everest Traverse and all this stuff. But where their main consumer is now is in these major cities. And so they still continue to market their clothing as, I think of like the Buzz Aldrin North Face commercial, which if you haven't seen, is just like amazing. One of the best commercials I've ever seen out there. Could have just speaks to my personality. I don't know if it was successful, but I saw that. It's like, I love the North Face. But yeah, they show it like, hey, it works for people on Everest, so it will work for you. Like people can make that connection. They want the comfort of knowing their Range Rover has sand mode and snow mode and rock crawl mode on it, even though they're using it to go pick their kids up from soccer practice. They like the comfort of knowing, oh, hey, this thing can do this if I ever really needed it to, right? Because we're always extrapolating these extreme situations we find ourselves in. So that is, I think, where a lot of those products and stuff kind of find its like interesting niches. They just sit there and they give us this like crazy experience of what we think we could be in and then walk it back. And I've always tried to find products, I guess, where it's like, am I going to buy this and then use it for its intended purpose? And I'm guilty for sure not doing that. But like finding something where it's like, okay, well, I want to leverage it to say that I'm buying this to unlock access to a new activity or new environment. I'm not buying it to like tell myself that I can do it, right? Like I would notoriously hike in Vans for forever because I was just like, I don't need, hiking shoes. Vans work just as good as the guy next to me in some like expensive hiking shoe that's whatever, right? And then once I got into trail running, then I was like, okay, now I just hike in trail running shoes. But yeah, I think it's like hacking our own thinking around things. Of like a friend of mine, he was telling me how he purchases products as like it's kind of like a pressure relief valve almost is the best way I can think of how he told me, where it's like he would be buying something and it'd be like a comfort. And I just think of Fight Club as soon as I hear that, right? But I think that that's like a really common sentiment of, we become the story we tell ourselves, unless you're Sam Harris, and then you're just here to figure out why you have the story written about you and hope it works out. But I think with purchasing behavior, a lot of us like buy ourselves the products for the set scenes that we tell ourselves we're in the movie of. It's like, oh, well, I'm actually living this like crazy life. And of course I'm living this crazy life. Like, look at all the stuff I have in my closet or in my gear closet or in my garage, or, like I am capable of doing crazy stuff because I own I'm going to call it costume or the gear or the equipment or the hard goods that would allow me to do it. But I don't actually do those things, right? And I think I'm guilty of that just as much as the next guy in a lot of areas. And I would be curious to see, like, just kind of like back to like the hard sciences of stuff, but like at, where did we like make that tilt of like, rather than we become the story we tell ourselves. I think a lot of us like purchase the set pieces so we can pretend we're in the movie we want to be in, right? Like that, what's the thing, main character syndrome, where I was talking about today, where like, that's like, oh, that guy's got main character energy. Like, I don't know. It would just be interesting, I guess, how do we swap our psychology around buying? And not that all of us are this way, but like, yeah, what I purchase is, it's why I like what you're doing with DNA, because it's like, it's more information. It's something for me to push up against, if that makes sense. Like I'm getting this information and now I can make a decision based off of it. It's opening a door. How do we like look at products and see those as opening doors that we should step through rather than like decorating the walls so we stay in the same space that we're in.
Right. Yeah, I had a conversation just not too long ago with somebody that had, I mean, you know, had the main character syndrome or whatever,
Right.
and it was so much at first, to be honest with you. I mean, I was like, okay, well, that's pretty amazing. Or, as time went on, you're listening to the stories and listening to what's being said, and at first we take things as face value, but by the end of my time with that person, all I could think of was, as Brian Regan calls it, the me monster. You know,
I, yes, I add the and I walked on the moon skit is where
Exactly,
you're at right
exactly.
now. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree on that. Where I can think about the first time I met someone who was like exorbitantly wealthy. And I was like, oh, okay. Like classes in session. I would love to have more money
Right.
than I know what to do with, right? Like, how do you operate?
How did you
And I
get there?
remember
Yeah.
and for like a few months, I was like really attentive on being like, they know something I don't. And let me try and, pick up some information. And um I think fairly quickly kind of picked up. I was just like, oh, I think you're just a bad person. Like I think that I want nothing. Like if success is the byproduct of how you've lived your life, I want no piece of that.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for that experience because I do know wealthy people, really fortunate to have a great network of people who unfortunately don't just write me checks, but, let me know good life decisions to make. Like buying a home in your early 20s. Thank you. Great advice. Pre-COVID home purchases were the move. If
Yeah.
only I bought 10 more. Um, but 24-year-old me didn't know how to buy 10 homes. Who knew? But I think it was like, I'm really grateful for that experience because it put a couple things into perspective where it's like, like my depiction of wealthy people is bit from my own experience in like a close knit circle, family and extended friends and stuff along those lines. And like stories you hear about, like, oh, this guy, his company always buys him first class, but he always gave his first class ticket to someone else, like to an older person on the flight. He was flying alone. Stories like that where you're like, oh yeah, see, money makes people good. Like, that's great.
Yeah.
And then really quickly from my experience with this person who definitely had the most money out of all of it. I mean, loads of money. I was just like, okay, success to me is, I need to figure out what that is. Like, I really need to define success in a way that isn't chasing what this person has, but being a different person once I had it. Because I
Right.
don't know if that was like, I'm not a eat the rich type person by any means. But I would bet that if you tested most people with exuberant wealth, they're a little bit of a narcissist. Like, but I'm a Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, like I love those guys. I don't know why, like I think they're doing, I would say like my uneducated, opinion, uneducated is like, when I need a new book, sometimes I go to Bill Gates list. And then I, think Warren Buffett is a legend for eating the way he does in his 90s. But then I think about like my own experience with really wealthy people or like some of the current super wealthy people. And I go, man, everyone seems to think that they know all the answer, have all the answer. Like you're really, really good at this one thing. And that now makes you really, really good at everything else. And maybe they need to adopt the radically mediocre lifestyle, which is like, maybe you did get really, really good at this one thing or really, really lucky and have like maybe, and I think like everyone, there's luck involved in everything. You can be the right person in the right place and then make a lot of money off of that. Probably doesn't mean that it was like divine intervention that happened for you. Ask Mitt Romney, who I love. Even that guy's like, I don't really think it matters. Like, I don't think there's some divine plan around how much money you have, believe it or not. I'm like, my guy. But
Yeah.
all to say, that experience couched with some of the other experiences I've had with people who are fortunate enough to have, be in their early 50s and go, I don't ever have to work if I don't ever want to again. to me, it was kind of like, okay, well, what do I want success for me to look like? And I came up with like a running definition, which is just want to be able to skydive as much as I want to and take Allie on all the trips and travel as much as she wants to without ever thinking about it. Like if I can do those two things, then I have enough money. I don't know what that dollar amount is. I don't know it. I don't know the size of the house we own. I don't know the car I'm driving in that scenario. I don't know any of that. But if I can do those two things, then I think I've hit a really healthy level of success in my own life. And that's a goal that's really worth chasing for me. Chasing some dollar amount because that like whatever dollar amount you're after is like, that's going to be the moment. And I would say if your audience is interested in the best piece of advice I ever got in my life, it was, on Rodeo Drive in California, which is usually not where you're going to get the best advice of your
That's
life.
where my brain, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, you're like, really? And I was with my dad, my twin brother and I, when we started getting a little older, my dad would take us to these like finance conferences that he was at. He owned an investment firm. And so he took us to these things and we would rent like, like when I say investment firm, everyone's like, oh, sick. And he would rent like Kia Sorrentos with like the most uncomfortable headrests in the world on these trips. So it wasn't like this bougie thing. But we like, my dad was a successful guy, is a successful guy, thankfully still around. And, but he's very humble, very private about all of it. And so we grew up kind of like, right at the end, he did really well in like the financial crisis. That's where his like, I guess conservative thinking really paid off and his firm grew a whole bunch. So by the time I was a senior in high school, right at, things were kind of starting to rebound from the financial crisis. We just noticed my dad was a lot less stressed. So we're like, okay, things must be going great. Like, like I still drive a Honda Civic, in high school. So, it hasn't materially affected my life, but like what's going on here? And so we were on Rodeo Drive and I saw a Ferrari for the first time and I'm not a car person. I was like, oh, that's cool, I guess.
Yeah.
Ferrari. And then we asked these like probing questions, right? So I asked my dad, I'm like, could you buy a Ferrari if you wanted to? Because we don't know how much money the guy's got. It could be enough to buy a brand new Honda Accord, or it could be enough to buy a Honda, a Ferrari. Okay, who knows until we ask. And he just kind of like stops and thinks and goes, I probably could. But if you're not enough without it, you're never going to be enough with it. And then like walked off. And I kind of was like, yeah, wait. I think that's true about more than just cars. And
yeah, make the list. There's a lot of things there that are
exactly. And I think that is a very long-winded way of me to share what I think was some of the best advice I ever got and the most interesting environment that you could maybe get that little, that's like probably something like after you don't get the job you want is like the,
right.
the tidbit of wisdom that you get dropped. But I've thought on that regularly throughout everything. And I think it's so true. And I think that when you meet people, really quick, maybe going back to the main character energy of like, who knows that? Maybe they don't have that same phrasing in their life, but they know, like what's the Shakespeare, like above all else to thine own self be true.
Yeah.
I think I know the people who don't need anything from me, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like they're not looking for me to validate their success and stature, which I would say this person who I met was like very keen to let me know how much money that they had, how successful they were, how the world really operates and that they're at the top of it. And, by my own definition, I go, yeah, that looks like a really miserable life. I've never been in a room with people who know you and anyone has ever said anything kind. No one's like outright rude, but no one is like saying that they would invite you to their birthday type comment, right?
Yeah.
Or like, oh yeah, I've got, it's all like, cool, we're in this room to achieve a goal the same way I go to the library to study for a law exam. I'm not going to go there on my free time. And so it's all a means to an end in a relationship with this person. And I think that that's just been such an interesting guiding philosophy. And And it's how I sometimes wonder I ended up in marketing, because I'm such a believer in like, like don't buy stuff to just, I listened to so much Rage Against the Machine and so much Fight Club growing up, but here I am like with a mortgage and still, playing along in the game. But I think that's a level of critical thought. I'm going to compliment myself. That level of critical thought is what made me want to start a company named Arch Nemesis, rather than some like design 720 type company, because I'm much more interested in the things that we're pushing up against and being something that other things have to push up against, rather than kind of like playing, it's like, why go out and look like what people expect you to look like, if that makes sense. Why go and I guess like play the part if there's no benefit to playing the part in a business world or any of those other things, and like indifference is everybody's worst enemy, I think, like our indifference to our own circumstance, indifference to the overwhelming sense of, I think, change that goes on in the world, and that empathy we all gain in interpersonal relationships and independent relationships in world and business. And so I wanted to be like the arch nemesis of indifference and consumer indifference. And the company, I joke, I want to be the thing that keeps your competitors up at night, because like that just makes me excited and lean in. And so I'm just a big believer in like knowing, like if you're not enough about it, you're never going to be enough with it. So if you're going to go get it, do it in a way that's exciting and fun for you. And, like doesn't feel like you have to sit there and make yourself think like somebody else, right? Like, I don't think that like Isaac Newton was sitting there being like, how did Tycho Brahe figure that thing out again? Like, how would he think about this problem, right? Or like I used to do a lot of writing, and I would catch myself reading my writing in the voice of people who I really liked. Because I used to publish a lot of poetry, Mark. And so I would read all this poetry. I know, right? I would read all this poetry in the voice of other authors who I really liked that did live performances. And I would just catch myself and be like, why am I, how would I read this out as something and not Buddy Wakefield? And so I had to like push up against this idea of like fitting in right away, because good to me is how someone else does something. But that doesn't mean that that's like the right way to go and do it. It's just I love how that person
the way
looks
they
and
do
feels or
the way
sounds.
they did it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, I think the lesson we mistakenly get from that a lot of the time is we'll go and do it their way. Rather than, okay, well, how did they learn how to do it? How do I learn how I do it? Right. Like, education is a great example. I know I'm on a roll here, but education is a great example of like, well, there's only one way to learn. And we are going to, you're going to show up at 7:30 in the morning. Even though all research says teenagers suck early in the morning, you're going to show up at 7:30, and then we're going to
work you through it.
And we're going to work off of bells, because industrial revolution, like we're still all, in factories living and dying by the bells. And so you're going to do this and then this. And then, like by the time you're 13, you should be reading this. Even though some of you were reading that at 8 and others of you don't ever want to read at that comprehension level, or never, I don't want to say will be, but you know what I mean? Like don't have that natural proclivity. Like me, I'll remember movie lines and books all day. You ask me to solve for why, I've learned that probably 20 times in my life in math, and I don't remember how to do it. I don't know why. I can remember movies that I watched 10 years ago. I should be able to do that. I just don't. But no.
But yeah, we're also different. We're also different in that aspect. You mentioned movie lines and this and that. For me, it's music. It's, we'll be listening to something and Victoria will go, what movie is that from? And I'm like, oh, it's from this one. It's at this scene, because the music is what clicks for me when it comes to that stuff.
Totally. Let me guess. Last of the Mohicans, right when like the world's on fire, isn't it? And then that violin kicks, and then it's just like, you're transported.
Yeah. See, right then,
to a whole nother world.
The tune's in my head.
Yeah.
right? Because I know
Yeah. It's
exactly
like
the one you're talking about.
it's, yeah. And it's just interesting to me, um, that like, given all of the research out there, and I'll go really broad, given the research out there about everything, what haven't we looked into at a macro level at this point, where we have some good general understandings that we still go about exceptionally unhealthy or unproductive habits and behaviors societally and personally, business, all of that, where it's like,
Yeah.
you know, I, and I don't have millions of dollars, so business people can come at me, but it's just kind of like treat people good and your business will probably be better than people who treat people like a means to an end. Okay. How often have we been involved or worked with or known people who treat people like cogs in a machine, as opposed to like independent people who are capable of critical thought? Or back to the education idea of like, well, we're going to treat people in this way. Sorry to get stuck on this, but there's a really interesting video that I will send to you and I think people should watch, from RSA Animate, the Royal Society of Arts in England. They put out these videos. I was in high school watching these, so they're like 15 years old. RSA Animate, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but if you just do RSA Animate Education, this like 10-minute video will pop up. They do this brilliant thing. They would take hour-long lectures or presentations at the Royal Society of Arts, compress it down to about 10 minutes, and then have a guy on a massive whiteboard illustrate the whole thing as the person's talking. And so, the illustrations are all sped up
Yeah.
to match the flow thing. But it's just, for someone like me who learns audibly and visually the best, just amazing. But he goes in and like the thing to me that has just, I haven't watched this video in 10 years, but I still just like die on this hill. It's like, they went in and did a test where they, before people, like they're like in kindergarten, and they have them do this test. And it basically is like, hey, who's a genius for their extrapolational thinking, right? Like name the amount of uses for a paperclip. And, when you're the people who get tested early, like 80% of them are geniuses. Like, why can't a paperclip be 80 feet tall and I use it as a diving board? Could it be made of styrofoam and something that I use as a packaging peanut instead of packaging peanut? Because maybe it takes up less space since there's that air in between it, right? Like extrapolational thinking of what is the function that I could possibly use a paperclip for. And as people get more educated and you measure them again, like 5 years down the line, and then another 5 years down the line, we somehow become less and less genius. By the time it was like 80% at the beginning, and by the end, there's like 17% who still are ranking as geniuses, even though they're now educated. They're ready to go into the world. They've got a high school diploma or the equivalent. Why are we now less intelligent? And I think it's because we're taught, well, this is how you think. Not,
Right.
I shouldn't say that. Sorry. This is the correct way to solve a problem. This is how we go about this thing, right? Like I remember being in business school and they're like, here's how you write a memo to request new windows for a warehouse in Hawaii that just got hit by a hurricane. And I was working for Red Bull at the time, like emailing the, North American head of consumer collecting, which was like the girls who hand out Red Bull products
Right.
and the people who put events on. And I'm like, hold on. I think sending professional emails at this time, right? Like I think I'm doing that thing. And I've never once had to worry about format or someone be like, hey, no, like the structure for this email actually needs to look this way. Or Ultra Running. I interviewed with Ultra Running, which is based in Logan. And they wanted to hire me while I was still in school to be on like their social and marketing team. And I brought in a resume that I had made and got a B+ for a business school. And, all that filled it out the way they wanted me to fill it out. And the guy who looks at my resume, who was a friend of a friend, which is how all business starts, is knowing a guy, looks at it and goes, yeah, you're great, but some personal advice is never use this resume again. He's like, this is just bad. And I just have always kind of laughed at that, where it's like institutional knowledge is not necessarily like the best real world knowledge. And to go full circle, like, let's just go back it. And I think we're at this, like, I think everyone who's now my age-ish starts to feel like, oh, we're at a big turning point. But like, like go look at generals leading World War I and being like, we should still do cavalry charges. And everyone's like, they have machine guns. They are just like mowing us down. And they're like smoking their big pipe thing, and being like, oh, but it's called chivalry and warfare. And no, like we should go and do the cavalry thing. Nothing can beat that. Like just
I'm
keep
gonna have to be
throwing
honest with
bodies.
you. That's a really, really bad English accent you're trying to throw in there.
Sorry, I'm not even doing an English accent. I was just doing an aristocratic. I can do an English accent.
No, but what you're saying,
But you
totally
are
makes,
accurate. It was terrible. Yeah, it's just like it's this institutional knowledge of like, well, this is how we've always done things. And I'm not saying it new here, but it's how we've always done things. And it takes, I don't know what, some seismic shift for people to go,
well,
that's not how we're going to do things moving forward.
Yeah, I had a perfect example of that was when I went back to college. So I went back to college in my 40s. And one of the prerequisite, one of the general ed courses that most universities have you take is one on public speaking.
Do I have a story for you on that one?
And I had already been and was a paid public speaker. So I was already making money speaking, right? And I go into this class and he failed me. I failed public speaking at a university because I didn't follow the format of what he thought. And he actually, it was just, and in reality, he and I butted heads just enough. I stopped going to class because I'm like, I'm not learning anything from him. And so I'm going to take something, because I thought maybe if I take this public speaking class, I can take pieces of that and take some of that knowledge and help me be better. Right.
Right.
But, by the end, it was like, oh, I'm so done taking this class. And so the joke is, here I've been a professional public speaker and I failed public speaking in college because it didn't fit within the realm, the exact thing that you're talking about. Right.
Yeah. I had a similar experience where, in high school, I was part of a constitutional debate competition, and it takes place across the country. Right. And the national champions happened to be someone we competed against for the state competition. And I beat the national champions for my unit, Philosophical and Historical Foundations of the Constitution, Current Relevance. So fun. But I was able to beat their team out of 6. Each team had 6 units. I was unit 1. My unit 1 was able to beat theirs. But I also failed AP government. That was the class that I took this competition in because I just didn't do the work, which is an easy way to fail a class. Who wouldn't know?
Yeah.
I was an amazing student. But I got a kick out of it at the time where I was just like, again, this is peak Rage Against the Machine and Fight Club era, where I was just like, holding up my fist, shaking it at the system, being like, your grades mean nothing. Like I can beat this team and fail your class if I want to, thinking I was making some
I can do it all.
Yeah, it's like but we've all known people, right? Where I risk sounding like, arrogant on this, which is, I think I'm, wildly unintelligent most of the time, right? Like there's a few things I'm good at. But I think we all know people when we were in school or in a lot of environments, I think I'm maybe a little bit smarter than you at this, but you have a better grade than me because you're following the formula better than I am. Like you're copying and pasting the information, and I am, at least how I would put it is, I think I'm engaging with the information. Like I'm not so quick to go, that'll be on the test, but I'm going, okay. And this is why I never can solve for why. Cause I still go, how the hell did we get to the point where someone goes, well, will you do the X? You have to do the Y. I'm like, why is that a universal truth? Like I need to talk to the guy.
There's
He's
context.
Like, whatever you do to X, you've got to do to Y.
Yeah.
I'm like, why is that phrase? You have to, just so annoying to me that I just stopped. I just stopped right there. And I'm like, okay, Pythagoras, was it you? Like, can we go talk about what the heck is going on over here? So yeah, I think to almost bring that all together, there's an interesting I guess like I'm really, really lucky to have a close friend who has gone through a lot more than me. I would put it that way, right? Like, um, and I think that I am guilty of defining myself off of a lot of benchmarks. Um, and I'm a very competitive person. Even if sometimes that means like self-sabotaging, right? Like being like, I'm removing myself from the competition. So you can't even like, and that somehow I'm making a statement like failing this class.
Right.
And that's me winning still, like you getting an A means nothing because I didn't even try.
Little twisted thought process there, but yeah, yeah.
Right. Exactly. But I think it's like going back to kind of the whole, like I spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, who am I? And that sounds like whatever, like one of those like things. It's like, like, yeah, someone's really real deep, David. Um, but I think it's this really, I laugh at like all the subtle art of not giving an F and all this stuff where I'm just kind of like, cool, that is Marcus Aurelius's The Meditations with the F word in it. And that's fine. If that's what you want to read, that's totally great. But I'm like there's this ancient old dialogue that we've all been going on with us. And we all act like we're the first person to try and solve it, right? We're the first person to try and figure out why am I the person I am today? Why do I feel the things that I feel? And how do I go about living with it? And we're surrounded by people who self-medicate, by people who distract, by people who look for quick and easy answers. And I think that like the medical side is an interesting start to the dialogue of, okay, well, who am I? And maybe now I'm caring about that because I can find out if I'm more prone to Alzheimer's or my body not, digest or ingest like vitamin C as well as it should be, or anything along those lines. And, my own family's like history with heart failure and stuff. Like it's why I've gone and done a full blood panel 32 is to just be like, okay, cool. I want a good baseline for everything that I could have as I continue to age. But then I think the part that's becoming more prevalent, and I'm curious to see if it involves in my definition of a healthy direction, is like the social science part that's tied to it, which is to me, social science just touches everything. But like, how the psychology around stress impacts the way your body physically handles that stress. And is it a super unhealthy thing, right? How much cortisol is being pumped into your body? Do we start to engage more with, why do we feel the things we feel and on them the way that we do, right? Like there's a great book by Aldous Huxley called Island, that apparently no one else has ever read, that kind of engages with this whole topic of Western civilization eats people from the shoulders up and ignores everything else from the shoulders down. And I've thought about that a bunch where I'm just kind of like, I've been really lucky I've talked to a therapist since I was 15 years old, still talk to that guy. And I joked that I paid for my friend. My longest term friend is someone I paid. But like I think I'm super lucky in the sense of some people like my wife are like very, I don't think need that type of stuff, right? Like the same way I don't need to eat healthy. I could eat Oreos and I'll never gain weight until someday, right? My metabolism will eventually fail.
Oh, trust me, it does.
It'll come. But like, I definitely at one point in my life in the Rage Against the Machine era, which I still have listened to a lot of Rage Against the Machine in the last 2 months, but, definitely needed an outside perspective. But I just think about that in the sense of like, we hire business coaches, we hire doctors, we hire all these things to kind of teach us, hey, I want to do this thing. How do I do it? How do I think strategically? How do I eat healthier? How do I start learning how to work out? So hire a coach or a professional personal trainer. Oh, but that stuff in your head, that feeling that things are going to always go wrong, or the sense of like whatever it might be, you're on your own. You figure that
You
one
got
out.
this. Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
like, to me, that is like insane that we expect people to continually figure, to me, it's like the core, the
Yeah.
stuff that you can never get away with, which is your emotions. You're on your own. You should figure that one out. And if you need to talk to somebody, like when I started doing it, 17 years ago, people were like, oh, you're people are going to think you're crazy. Like you're like, that is what like crazy people do, is talk to this, or like you shouldn't tell people about it. And I still, don't talk about it. You've known me for 5 years and probably didn't know any of this.
No.
It's not something I talk about in a way that I try and promote as like a part of who I am.
But I think the
it's
world has
something that's like,
shifted in the last 17 years, right?
yeah, I
There's
think that
been a
like I
big
see the
shift.
BetterHelp
Yeah.
commercials.
Yep.
But that also is like on the same side of that is like my worry with it, which is, I think back to Shakespeare, to know thyself is hard work, right?
Right. It
And
is.
that's where I go back. Like, I'm really fortunate to have friends who have gone through things that I never want to go through, and get the benefit of that experience and perspective in my own life from talking to them. And I'm a massive, like, if there's one thing I want more of in my life at any time, it is perspective in business and relationships, any of those things. It's why I like history. Is probably, we aren't the first people to figure this out, right? I mentioned that earlier. But I think that there's a lot of like bad science out there on, oh, well, like if you don't feel good, you should just, like just walk away from it. Like our goal is to be happy all of the time, and we just want to feel good all of the time. And I'm like, I don't think that's a realistic goal.
Yeah. I was just going to say, that's not reality. That's not reality.
I think reality is like, how do you have the tools and equipment the same way in a financial situation, right? Like, how do you set something aside for a rainy day? How do you have the emotional tools to deal with things when they go bad?
Right.
We see all these different expressions of that, of people who are like have crystals by their bed, which that one never makes sense to me. Or like the David Goggins approach, which is like, I just shut up and run 50 miles because, like that's what hardcore people do. And when life sucks, I still have, this training of like, well, I get through things that suck, so I can still do this. And there's a place for all of that there. But I think it's like, are we using it as a mechanism of self-reflection? The same way I think, my favorite thing of like, when you're actually buying products, is that a mechanism of self-reflection? Is this something like, I mentioned this at the top of the call before we started recording. I love the brand Liquid Death because I see myself in it. And I love, I just like laugh at the stuff that they do. Not because I necessarily am like, oh yeah, I need to drink more water. I should drink more water instead of coffee. But I think that the ability to find what makes you, really engage with it. And I think it's like trench warfare from my personal experience, like trying to figure out and be comfortable with who you are and like put in the work. It's like being in the trenches. Like I would go to Best Buys and practice saying, I'd ask about a product. This is back when Best Buys were a big thing, and I'd look at something, and they were notorious at this time for like being really, oh, do you want me to grab that for you? I'll grab it out. We can go look at it. Like here's this $800 camera. Like let's go look at it. I would just go to Best Buy, look at something, wait for someone to ask me a question, and then say no, to practice saying no to people and figure out that like the world wasn't going to end if I set a boundary. Like, it was just like, that was a really weird thing to do. Right. But it was like, that was the practical steps of like, okay, like how do you have a theory and test it? Rather than like you listening to some hype up song and then like becoming this main character energy, right? Like, I think that, I think that like real mental health is knowing that you don't need something from somebody else. The same way that really wealthy person, to me, I would describe as an exceptionally mentally unhealthy person. Not in like an insane, they should be in an insane asylum way, but I'm just kind of like, you, I think, are still playing out something from a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Where you just like are like, I call them an empivore. And I'm like, you are just eating people's emotions for lunch. And then as soon as they're husks, you throw them aside and get the next person.
Empivore. Okay.
Yeah. They just, And it was,
There's
it was just a
today.
lot, I think.
There's the word for the day. Everybody find a
Word
way
for the
to
day,
use
empivore.
empivore today in a sentence.
Yeah. And hopefully not someone, you don't need to describe someone in direct relation to you that way. But, yeah, I guess it's just been a very, I guess it's, to why did I name a company Arch Nemesis? Why do I read the things that I do? I think that it's been an expression in the long part of this other journey that I've been on in the background of just like, how do I go from this? Like, when I was 15 and saw a psychiatrist for the first time, they just went down the DSMV or whatever it's called, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, not DSMV, DSM. And at the end, we're like, yeah, you're just so down the line, like anxiety and depressed, that I'm just going to prescribe you meds right now. Typically, I refer you to a therapist and then they talk to you for a bit and then I do it, but you are so down the line. I'm just going to assign you medication right now and then still go talk to this guy. And that guy and I have talked to for the last 17 years and it's been great. But I think that that's been a really lucky thing that I got put in. Someone in my circle was like, yeah, 15-year-old David should talk to someone. And I did. And then from that, I basically had someone in for the last 17 years who goes, okay, yeah, like you're experiencing this, but like, you're also telling, like, is this the same way a business coach goes, okay, you got told no in that pitch meeting. Is that the only pitch meeting you're ever going to get? And somehow someone else saying that to you goes, oh yeah, there's probably there's hundreds more I could go get.
Right.
Having someone in your corner just be that third person of just like, okay, is this really the end of the world? You're like, yeah, maybe it isn't, and then giving feedback on like, hey, like you should, again, it is like the most hard work I've ever done is the mental side of things to just like feel okay, if that makes sense. Like a healthy person.
It does.
And now I think I've reaped the benefits of that for years, where it's not like this trench warfare anymore. But I think that it's really evident when you meet people who don't all have to have the same experience I did. And hopefully it's evident when you meet people where it's like, yeah, like you just know who you are and you're not looking for validation or proof from me. You're not needing for me to see things your way.
Right.
And we run into this with politics, religion all the time, right? Where people are like, I need you to see things my way because I need you to validate my point of view. And if you can't validate my point of view, now I have to undermine you as a information source. I've got to write you off with some fallacy of like, well, you don't have as much money as me, or your background is, you're not as educated, you're not as, whatever it might be. That's like all those things that like, I've run into people in business who do that to me all the time. They're like, well, you're young or you're this or whatever it might be. And I'm just like, that doesn't mean I'm wrong. And I'm open to being wrong. I don't think you're open to being wrong. Or for there being more than one right path. So yeah, I think if I had any takeaway from all this whole conversation, it would be RSA Animate, Island by Aldous Huxley. And, if I had one, it would be probably On the Shortness of Life by Seneca or Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Those things are things that everyone should go and take part in.
Okay, we'll make sure those are added in the description so that people can go find those. Yeah. So
yeah, perfect. I'm imagining most of your audience is like, yeah, I've read Frankl, but Frankl quotes Rilke, I didn't even mention Rilke. Letters to a Young Poet. That's Letters to a Young Poet, Man's Search for Meaning, and On the Shortness of Life are my collection of 3 books that you could read quick but shouldn't, because they are pretty thin. But I think those are that's like the starter program onto, how do I get some perspective on life and what I'm doing? I think those are good ones.
That's awesome. Well, I was actually, and you answered the question that I had in my head. You've brought up several books and I'm like, okay, David, what are the 3? And then you've rattled off 3. So we're going to make sure those are
4 actually, because Aldous Huxley's Island.
Yes, you're right. So I apologize. Apparently math was not my strong suit. So we were at 4 instead of 3 because y equals 4.
Yeah,
exactly. So
it has to, because you did it to X. So now X.
Yes. So that exactly 4. Right. So, well, David, I thank you so much for coming on today. and spending a little bit and visiting with us. And then, like I say, there's so many things. You and I could spend hours and hours talking. And we have.
We have.
We have. And so, but thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate you being a part and spending a little bit of your precious Saturday morning with us.
Hey, I'm happy to do it anytime. I hope the conversation wasn't just me rambling endlessly. So,
No,
hope
you're
that
good.
it got
You're
to
good.
some conclusions there.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. And thanks, David, once again.
Absolutely. See you.